The wind howled through Deadwood Gulch like a banshee that October night, carrying with it the scent of coming snow and the distant promise of winter's bite. Inside Murphy's saloon, the warmth of pressed bodies and whiskey breath created a fog that clung to the low wooden beams, mixing the sweet perfume of painted ladies with the sharp tang of gunpowder that seemed to follow every man who rode the frontier. Nathan Cole pushed through the bat-wing doors at 9:30, his spurs singing a metallic song against the warped floorboards. The stranger's entrance didn't go unnoticed. Conversations dimmed to murmurs, and more than one hand drifted toward holstered iron. In a town where everyone knew everyone else's business, a new face meant either opportunity or trouble, and Nathan's cold gray eyes suggested it might well be both. He was tall and lean, built like a man who'd spent years in the saddle, with hands that bore the calluses of both reins and rifle. His black coat was dusty from the trail, but his boots were good leather, and the weight of his saddlebags had spoken of gold when he dismounted outside. The kind of gold that made desperate men do foolish things. "Whiskey?" Nathan said to the barkeep, his voice carrying the flat accent of Kansas plains. "The real kind, not the rot gut you serve the cowboys." Murphy himself poured the drink, studying this newcomer with the practiced eye of a man who'd survived 20 years serving liquor to killers and saints alike. "Passing through, mister?" "Maybe." Nathan's eyes swept the room, taking in the poker game in the far corner where smoke hung thick as morning mist. "Depends on what kind of entertainment you got here." A harsh laugh cut through the saloon's din. "Entertainment? Hell, stranger, you just walked into the best show in 3 counties. The voice belonged to Jonas Snake Carver, so named for his habit of striking fast and leaving his enemies to die slow. He sat at the green felt table like a king holding court, his black vest unbuttoned over a gut grown soft from too much whiskey and too little work. Gold teeth glinted when he smiled, and his small dark eyes never stopped moving, cataloging threats and weaknesses with the cold calculation of a professional predator. Around the table sat 4 other men, locals mostly, their faces bearing the deep lines of worry and the pale complexion of those who'd been losing steadily for hours. The pile of coins and crumpled bills in front of Jonas told the story clearly enough. But it wasn't the money that caught Nathan's attention. It was the girl. She sat in a straight-backed chair near the wall, her wrists bound with rope that had rubbed raw against her pale skin. Clara Monroe was perhaps 22, with auburn hair that caught the lamplight like burnished copper and green eyes that held equal measures of defiance and despair. Her blue dress, once fine enough for Sunday services, was now torn at the shoulder and stained with dirt from the trail. She didn't look at the poker game. Instead, her gaze remained fixed on some distant point beyond the grimy window, as if she could will herself away from this place through sheer determination. But Nathan saw the way her hands trembled slightly, and how she flinched every time Jonas's laugh boomed across the room. "That your woman?" Nathan asked, nodding toward Clara as he approached the table. Jonas's grin widened, showing more gold. "She is tonight. Won her fair and square from her daddy 3 days back. Poor old fool thought he could bluff his way out of debt with a pair of 5s. He gestured lazily with his cigar. "Course, if you're feeling lucky. Stranger, everything's got a price. Even her." Clara's head snapped up then, and for the first time, Nathan saw the full force of her fear. Not the timid worry of a sheltered woman, but the bone-deep terror of someone who understood exactly what kind of men she was dealing with. "What's the buy-in?" Nathan asked, settling into the empty chair across from Jonas. "Depends on your appetite for risk." Jonas dealt the cards with practiced ease, the worn deck whispering secrets against his fingers. We start easy, $50. But the real fun begins when the stakes get interesting. Nathan pulled a leather pouch from his coat and let it thud onto the table. Gold coins spilled out, catching the lamplight and drawing hungry stares from every man present. More money than most of them saw in a year. Deal the cards, he said simply. The game began in earnest then, with the quiet intensity that marked serious gambling. Nathan played with the patience of a man who understood that fortune favored not the bold, but the prepared. He folded early hands, watched Jonas's tells, and slowly built a picture of his opponent's habits. Jonas was good, better than good. His fingers never hesitated, his face never betrayed his thoughts, and he read other players like scripture. But he had the fatal flaw of all successful bullies. He believed his own reputation made him invincible. As the night wore on and the stakes climbed higher, the other players dropped out one by one, their modest stakes claimed by the two men who sat across from each other like opposing generals. The saloon grew quieter, conversations dying as word spread that something significant was happening at the poker table. Interesting hands you've been showing, stranger, Jonas said around his cigar as he dealt another round. Almost like you know exactly what you're doing. Man's gotta have a talent for something. Indeed he does. Jonas's eyes glittered with malice. Tell you what, let's make this interesting. I'll put the girl in the pot. Clara's sharp intake of breath was audible across the room. Nathan didn't look at her, but he felt the weight of her gaze like a physical thing. What's she worth to you? Nathan asked, his voice betraying nothing. Everything I've won tonight, plus. Jonas pushed forward a small leather pouch that clinked with the sound of gold. 500 in coin. Course, if you lose, I get your horse, your guns, and whatever's left in that bag of yours. The saloon had gone completely silent now. Even the piano player had stopped, his hands frozen above the keys as everyone waited to see what the stranger would do. Nathan studied his cards, 3 queens and 2 tens, a full house, queens high. In any reasonable game, it was a winning hand. But this wasn't a reasonable game, and Jonas Carver wasn't a reasonable man. Call, Nathan said quietly. Jonas's smile stretched wider than seemed possible. With theatrical flourish, he laid down his cards one by one. 4 aces, stranger, looks like your luck just ran dry. But Nathan didn't move. Instead, he sat perfectly still for a long moment, his gray eyes fixed on Jonas's face. Then, with movements as deliberate as a funeral march, he placed his own cards on the table. Straight flush, he said simply. 8 through Queen of Hearts. The silence that followed was complete and terrible. Jonas stared at the cards as if they might change if he looked hard enough, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and something that might have been fear. That's impossible, he whispered. I saw you. You drew 2 cards. Nobody makes a straight flush drawing 2. Nathan began collecting his winnings with the same methodical precision he'd shown all night. Apparently somebody does. The sound of chairs scraping back echoed through the saloon as Jonas's remaining friends reached for their weapons. But Nathan was already moving, his Colt appearing in his hand with deadly speed. I wouldn't, he said conversationally, though his voice carried the chill of a January wind. I came for cards, not killing, but I'm prepared for both. Jonas raised a hand, and his men reluctantly eased back into their seats. But the saloon owner's eyes promised that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. Stranger, Jonas said, his voice low and dangerous. Nobody takes what belongs to Snake Carver and rides away clean. Nathan stood slowly, his gun still trained on the table. Maybe. But tonight, the cards said different. He moved toward Clara then, holstering his weapon but keeping his hand near the grip. The girl looked up at him with a mixture of hope and terror, clearly uncertain whether she was being rescued or simply changing masters. "Easy now," Nathan said quietly as he reached for the ropes binding her wrists. "This'll all be over soon." His fingers worked at the knots with surprising gentleness, and Clara found herself studying his face in the lamplight. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with weather-beaten features that spoke of hard years under open skies. But his eyes, those cold gray eyes, held depths she couldn't fathom. As the ropes fell away, Clara rubbed her chafed wrists and whispered urgently, "You don't understand what you've done. Jonas doesn't lose gracefully, and he's got friends, bad friends. The Bitter Creek gang won't let this stand." Nathan glanced back at the poker table, where Jonas sat rigid with fury, his men flanking him like wolves waiting for the signal to attack. "Then I guess we'd better not be here when they decide to do something about it." The stranger's hand closed around Clara's elbow, firm but not cruel, and he began guiding her toward the door. Behind them, the scrape of chairs and angry muttering suggested that their time was running short. As they reached the bat-wing doors, Nathan paused and looked back one last time. Jonas was standing now, his hand resting on his gun butt, face twisted with rage and wounded pride. "Thanks for the game," Nathan called out, tipping his hat in mock courtesy. Then he pushed through the doors into the cold night air, Clara beside him, as the sound of overturning tables and shouted curses erupted behind them like thunder before a storm. The October wind cut through Deadwood Gulch like a knife, carrying the bite of coming winter and the acrid smell of coal smoke from the blacksmith's forge. The wooden sidewalk creaked under their feet as Nathan guided Clara away from Murphy's saloon, his hand steady on her elbow while his eyes swept the darkened street for signs of trouble. Clara stumbled slightly, her legs unsteady after hours of sitting bound in that chair. But when Nathan's grip tightened to steady her, she jerked away as if his touch burned her skin. "Don't," she whispered, pressing herself against the weathered wall of the general store. "Please, just don't." Nathan stopped, studying her face in the pale moonlight that filtered through the scattered clouds. Her green eyes were wide with terror, but not the grateful relief he might have expected from someone just rescued from a dire situation. Instead, she looked at him with the same fear she'd shown Jonas Carver, the bone-deep wariness of a cornered animal that had learned the hard way that every human contact brought pain. "I'm not going to hurt you," Nathan said quietly, keeping his voice low and his hands visible. "I know you got no reason to trust me, but—" "Trust you?" Clara's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "Mister, you just signed both our death warrants in there. You think winning a card game against Snake Carver means you own me now? You think I should be grateful?" Behind them, the saloon doors burst open with a violent crash that echoed down the empty street. Angry voices spilled out into the night, and Nathan caught Jonas's distinctive snarl rising above the rest. "Find them. I don't care if you have to turn this whole godforsaken town upside down." Nathan moved closer to Clara, his voice urgent but still carefully controlled. "We need to get moving. Where's your horse?" "I don't have a horse," Clara spat, backing further along the wall. "I'm not going anywhere with you. You want to get yourself killed for some foolish notion of chivalry. That's your business. But I won't be dragged into another man's grave." "Then what's your plan?" Nathan asked, genuine curiosity mixing with impatience. "Stay here and wait for Jonas to cool off?" "Because I'm guessing that's not going to happen." Clara's face crumpled for just a moment, revealing the exhaustion and despair she'd been fighting to hide. "You don't understand." she whispered, glancing nervously toward the saloon where shadows moved behind the lit windows. Jonas isn't just some local bully. He's connected to the Bitter Creek Gang, the worst bunch of cutthroats and murderers this side of the Mississippi. They've got hideouts scattered across 3 territories, and they don't forget a slight. She pressed her back against the rough wooden siding, her voice dropping to barely audible. Last year, a merchant in Tombstone tried to shortchange one of their poker games. They burned his store down with him inside it, then went after his wife and children. Nobody crosses the Bitter Creek Gang and lives to tell about it. Nathan absorbed this information without visible reaction, though something cold settled in his stomach. He'd heard whispers of the Bitter Creek Gang during his travels, rumors of night raids, missing travelers, and whole families found dead in their homesteads with no explanation beyond a playing card left nailed to the door. "How long has Jonas had you?" he asked. 3 days. Clara's hand went unconsciously to her throat, where faint bruises marked her pale skin. "My father was a mail carrier on the Butterfield route. Good man, honest man, but he had a weakness for cards. Jonas let him run up debts for months, then called them all in at once. $2,000, more money than Daddy ever saw in his whole life." Her voice cracked slightly. "When Daddy couldn't pay, Jonas said he'd take me instead. Called it collateral until the debt could be settled. But we both knew Daddy would never see that kind of money. Jonas was just waiting." "Waiting for what?" Clara shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself. "For some of his friends to arrive from their winter camp. He likes an audience for his entertainments." The meaning hit Nathan like a physical blow, and his jaw tightened with barely controlled anger. Behind them, the sound of boots on wood announced that the search was spreading beyond the saloon. "My horse is at the livery stable," Nathan said, making his decision. 2 blocks down, behind Morrison's feed store. Can you make it that far?" "I told you, I'm not—" "Clara," Nathan's voice carried a weight that made her look up sharply. "I know you got no reason to trust me. Hell, I wouldn't trust me either if I was in your position. But right now, I'm the only thing standing between you and whatever Jonas has planned. You can come with me willingly, or I can throw you over my shoulder and carry you. But either way, we're leaving this street before those men come looking." Something in his tone, not threatening, but absolutely certain, made Clara study his face more carefully. She saw determination there, yes, but also something else. A quiet fury that spoke of personal stakes in this game. "Why?" she asked suddenly. "Why did you really come to that poker game tonight? And don't tell me it was just for cards and whiskey. Men like you don't win hands like that through luck." Nathan was quiet for a long moment, listening to the growing commotion behind them. Someone was shouting orders, and the sound of horses being saddled carried on the night air. "My brother," he said finally. "Jacob. He was 19, just a kid really, but he thought he was man enough to take on the world. Got mixed up with some bad people down in New Mexico territory. The Bitter Creek Gang." Clara's breath caught. "What happened to him?" "They found his body in a ravine outside Roswell last spring. Been dead for weeks by the time anyone discovered him. Had a playing card nailed to his chest. The ace of spades, their calling card." Nathan's hand drifted unconsciously to his gun butt. "I've been tracking them ever since, following whispers and rumors from one town to the next. When I heard Jonas Carver was running games in Deadwood Gulch, I knew I'd found at least one thread of the web." "So you're what, some kind of bounty hunter?" "I was, before Jacob died. I used to track down wanted men for the territorial marshals. Good money in it. And I had a talent for finding people who didn't want to be found. His smile was cold and bitter. "Now I only hunt one kind of prey." The sound of approaching footsteps made them both freeze. Voices carried clearly in the crisp air. "Check the hotel. Try the livery. If they got horses, they can't have gone far." Nathan grabbed Clara's hand, ignoring her instinctive flinch. "Time to go. Stay close and stay quiet." They moved through the shadows like ghosts, using the gaps between buildings to avoid the main street where torches were beginning to flicker as the search intensified. Clara's shoes were soft-soled and silent, while Nathan's spurs had been muffled with leather wrappings, the habits of a man who'd learned that survival often depended on not being heard. The livery stable sat at the edge of town, a long, low building that smelled of hay and horses. Nathan's mount, a powerful bay gelding named Thunder, nickered softly at his approach. The horse was already saddled, another habit that had kept Nathan alive through dangerous years. "Can you ride?" Nathan asked as he led the horse from its stall. "I'm a mail carrier's daughter," Clara replied with a touch of her old spirit. "I was riding before I could properly walk." Nathan swung into the saddle and extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Clara grasped it and let him pull her up behind him. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through both of them. She hadn't been touched gently by a man in days, and he hadn't been close to a woman in longer than he cared to remember. "Where are we going?" Clara asked, her arms circling his waist as Thunder began to move. "Away from here. Fast as we can manage." They were halfway across the stable yard when the shout went up behind them. "There! At Morrison's! They got a horse!" Nathan spurred Thunder into a gallop, and the big horse responded like he'd been struck by lightning. They burst from the stable yard onto the main street just as Jonas Carver and 3 of his men emerged from the saloon, guns already drawn. The crack of pistol fire split the night air, but Nathan was already guiding Thunder around the corner of the bank building, using the structure to shield them from the worst of the gunfire. Clara pressed her face against his back, feeling the solid muscle and warm wool of his coat, trying not to think about the bullets that had whistled past her head. "Hold tight," Nathan called over the thunder of hoofbeats. "This is going to get worse before it gets better." Behind them, the sound of pursuit was already beginning, horses being mounted, gear hastily gathered, and Jonas's voice rising above it all in a stream of curses that would have made a cavalry sergeant blush. As they raced through the outskirts of Deadwood Gulch, Clara found herself clinging to this stranger who'd just turned her world upside down. She still didn't trust him, couldn't afford to trust anyone. But for the first time in 3 days, she felt something other than despair. It might only be the illusion of hope, she told herself. But sometimes an illusion was enough to keep a person breathing until morning came. The last lights of town disappeared behind them as Thunder carried them into the vast darkness of the frontier, where dangers waited in every shadow, but where, perhaps, freedom might still be possible for those brave enough to seize it. Thunder's hooves struck sparks from the rocky trail as they climbed the steep path that wound through the pine-covered hills above Deadwood Gulch. The October night was crisp and clear, with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds thrown on black velvet. Behind them, the lights of the town grew smaller with each stride, but Nathan could still hear the distant sounds of pursuit, horses being mounted, gear rattling, and Jonas Carver's voice cutting through the night air like a whip crack. Clara pressed herself against Nathan's back, her arms tight around his waist as Thunder navigated the treacherous terrain with the sure-footedness of a mountain goat. She could feel the solid warmth of the man in front of her, the steady rhythm of his breathing, and the controlled tension in his muscles as he guided their mount through the darkness. Despite her fear and mistrust, she found herself drawing comfort from his apparent competence. "They're still following," she called over the sound of wind and hoofbeats. "I know," Nathan replied, his voice calm despite their circumstances. "But they'll have to be careful in this terrain. One wrong step and—" His words were cut off by something that made them both freeze in their saddles. A smell, sharp and acrid, carried on the night wind. Not the clean scent of wood smoke from cabin chimneys, but something else entirely, something that spoke of danger and deliberate destruction. "You smell that?" Nathan asked, pulling Thunder to a halt on a small plateau that overlooked the town. Clara lifted her head, testing the air like a wild animal sensing a predator. "Coal oil," she whispered, her voice tight with sudden understanding. "Dear God, that's coal oil." They turned in the saddle to look back at Deadwood Gulch, and what they saw made Clara's blood run cold. Dark figures moved through the streets below like shadows given substance, carrying torches and what appeared to be buckets or jugs. Even at this distance, they could see the purposeful nature of their movements as they converged on one building in particular. Murphy's Saloon. "They're going to burn it," Clara breathed, her hands tightening their grip on Nathan's coat. "Jonas must have given the order. He'd rather destroy the place than let anyone think he was beaten fair and square." Nathan watched the scene unfold with grim fascination. He'd heard of such things, men so consumed by rage and wounded pride that they'd destroy everything rather than accept defeat. But seeing it happen was different, more visceral and terrible than he'd imagined. Below them, the dark figures had surrounded the saloon completely. Torches moved in coordinated patterns as the coal oil was splashed against the wooden walls, across the front porch, and apparently inside the building itself. The whole operation had the efficiency of a military maneuver, suggesting that this wasn't the first time the Bitter Creek gang had employed such tactics. "The people inside," Clara said suddenly, her voice cracking with horror. "Murphy, the piano player, the girls who work there, they're still inside." Nathan squinted through the darkness, trying to make out details. "No," he said after a moment. "Look closer. See how the light's moving. They're bringing people out through the back. Jonas may be a snake, but he's not stupid. Burning down a saloon full of witnesses would bring every marshal in 3 territories down on his head." As if to confirm his words, they saw figures streaming from the rear of the building, shadowy forms that scattered quickly into the surrounding darkness. The piano music that had provided a tinny soundtrack to their earlier drama had stopped abruptly, replaced by shouts and the sound of furniture being overturned. "They're clearing everyone out," Nathan continued, his voice thoughtful. "This is about sending a message, not committing wholesale slaughter." Clara shuddered, remembering Jonas's cold smile and the casual way he'd discussed her fate. "What kind of message?" "That crossing the Bitter Creek gang has consequences. That nobody takes what belongs to them and rides away clean." Nathan's voice carried a bitter edge. "It's the same message they left nailed to my brother's chest." The first torch touched the coal oil-soaked wood with results that were both immediate and spectacular. Flames raced up the front wall of Murphy's Saloon like living things, hungry and eager for destruction. Within moments, the entire front of the building was engulfed, orange and red tongues of fire licking at the wooden awning and climbing toward the second-story windows. The light was visible for miles, a beacon of destruction that painted the surrounding buildings in hellish reds and deep shadows. Thunder shifted nervously beneath them, sensing the distant heat and the acrid smoke that was beginning to drift up the mountain slope. But it was the sound that struck Clara most profoundly, not the crackling of flames or the distant shouts of the arsonists, but something else, entirely. A low rumbling noise that seemed to come from the very earth itself, growing louder and more ominous with each passing second. "What is that?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the growing din. Nathan's face had gone pale in the firelight, his eyes fixed on something Clara couldn't see from her position behind him. "That," he said quietly, "is the sound of a building about to come apart." The explosion, when it came, was like nothing Clara had ever experienced. The entire center of Murphy's Saloon simply disintegrated in a ball of orange fire and flying debris. Bottles of whiskey and coal oil that had been stored in the basement detonated almost simultaneously, turning the building into a massive firework that lit up the night sky like a miniature sun. The sound rolled across the landscape like thunder, echoing off the canyon walls and causing thunder to rear in terror. Nathan fought to control the frightened horse while Clara screamed, not from fear of falling, but from the sheer, overwhelming violence of what they'd just witnessed. Burning fragments of wood and glass rained down on the surrounding buildings, some of which immediately caught fire themselves. The volunteer fire brigade's bell began clanging frantically, but Clara could see even from this distance that their efforts would be futile. The flames were spreading too fast, jumping from roof to roof with terrifying speed. "Sweet Mary and Joseph," Clara whispered, her voice lost in the chaos below. "The whole town's going to burn." But Nathan was watching something else entirely. The dark figures that had started the fire were now mounting their horses with the same military precision they'd shown in their arson. Even as the town below them descended into chaos, the members of the Bitter Creek gang were withdrawing in good order, their work completed to their satisfaction. "They're leaving," he observed, his voice carrying a note of professional admiration despite his personal hatred for these men. "They've made their point, and now they're getting out before the territorial authorities arrive to investigate." Clara followed his gaze and saw the line of horsemen streaming out of town like a dark river, heading west toward the Badlands where pursuit would be difficult and dangerous. At their head rode a figure she recognized even at this distance, Jonas Carver, sitting his horse like a conquering general surveying his victory. "He's looking for us," Clara said suddenly, her voice tight with renewed fear. "Even now, he's thinking about where we might have gone." Nathan nodded grimly. "That's why we're not staying here to watch the show. Come on." He spurred Thunder back into motion, guiding the big horse along a narrow trail that led deeper into the mountains. Behind them, the fire continued to spread through Deadwood Gulch like a living thing, consuming everything in its path. By morning, Clara knew there would be nothing left of the town but ash and charred timbers. As they rode, Clara found herself thinking about the people she'd known in that town. Shopkeepers and saloon girls, cowboys and clerks, all the ordinary folks who made up the fabric of frontier life. Most would survive, she knew, but their livelihoods were gone, burned to nothing because of a card game and a man's wounded pride. "This is my fault," she said suddenly, the words torn from her by guilt and horror. "If I hadn't been there, if my father hadn't gambled me away—" "Stop!" Nathan's voice cut through her self-recrimination like a knife. "This isn't about you, Clara. This is about men who think they can take whatever they want and destroy whatever they can't have. Your father's debt was just an excuse. If it hadn't been you, it would have been something else." The truth of his words did little to ease the pain in her heart, but Clara found herself grateful for his refusal to let her shoulder blame that didn't belong to her. In her experience, men were quick to blame women for the violence that followed them, as if feminine presence somehow justified masculine brutality. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the steady rhythm of Thunder's hooves and the distant crackling of flames behind them. The mountain air was thin and cold, carrying the scent of pine and granite along with the acrid smell of burning wood that seemed to follow them no matter how far they traveled. "Where are we going?" Clara asked eventually. Away, Nathan replied. For now, that's enough. She wanted to press him for more details, but something in his voice warned her that questions would not be welcome. Instead, she contented herself with studying the landscape around them, the towering pines that blocked out most of the starlight, the rocky outcroppings that looked like sleeping giants in the darkness, and the narrow trail that seemed to wind endlessly upward into the night. Behind them, the glow of the burning town gradually faded until it was nothing more than a red smudge on the horizon, like a sunset in the wrong direction. But Clara knew that the memory of this night would burn in her mind forever. The sound of the explosion, the sight of Jonas Carver's satisfied smile, and the feeling of riding away from everything she'd ever known into an uncertain future with a man who was still essentially a stranger. As thunder carried them higher into the mountains, Clara pressed her face against Nathan's back and tried not to think about what tomorrow would bring. For now, it was enough that they were alive, that they were free, and that the flames behind them were growing smaller with each step. But in her heart, she knew that Jonas Carver and the Bitter Creek gang weren't the type of men to accept defeat gracefully. This was far from over. It was. She realized with a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air, only the beginning. The mountain stream ran clear and cold under the pale light of a crescent moon, its gentle murmur a stark contrast to the chaos they'd left behind in Deadwood Gulch. Nathan guided Thunder down the rocky bank to where the water pooled in a natural basin, surrounded by towering pines whose dark branches swayed gently in the night breeze. The air here was clean and sharp, carrying the scent of pine needles and granite, with no trace of smoke or burning wood to remind them of the destruction they'd witnessed. It had been nearly 2 hours since they'd watched Murphy's saloon explode into flames, and Thunder was lathered with sweat despite the cold mountain air. The big gelding had carried them up treacherous trails and across rocky ridges with the sure-footedness of a mountain goat, but even his considerable endurance had limits. We'll rest here, Nathan said, swinging down from the saddle with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent half his life on horseback. Thunder needs water, and we need to put more distance between us and anyone who might be following. Clara remained seated on the horse for a moment, her body stiff from the long ride and her mind still reeling from everything that had happened. The reality of her situation was beginning to sink in. She was alone in the wilderness with a man she barely knew, with no clear destination and no way to contact what little family she had left. "Come on down," Nathan said, his voice gentler than she'd expected. "I know you're scared, but I give you my word. You're safe with me." Clara looked down at him, studying his face in the moonlight. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps in his early 30s, with the kind of weathered features that came from years of hard living under open skies. But there was something in his gray eyes, a steadiness, a quiet strength, that made her want to believe him. Slowly, carefully, she slid down from Thunder's back, her legs trembling slightly from exhaustion and nervous tension. Nathan caught her elbow to steady her, and this time she didn't pull away, though she remained tense and ready to flee at the first sign of danger. "Sit," Nathan said, gesturing toward a fallen log near the water's edge. "Rest while I tend to the horse." Clara sank onto the makeshift seat gratefully, watching as Nathan began the methodical process of caring for his mount. He worked with practiced efficiency, loosening the saddle cinch, checking Thunder's hooves for stones, and leading the horse to the stream for a long drink. There was something almost ritualistic about his movements, and Clara found herself oddly comforted by the sight of a man who clearly understood the importance of caring for the animal that had just saved their lives. While Nathan worked, Clara examined her surroundings more carefully, The small clearing was sheltered on three sides by rocky outcroppings that would make them difficult to spot from a distance, while the fourth side opened onto the stream that would muffle the sound of their voices. It was, she realized, an excellent place to hide, the kind of spot a man would choose if he'd spent years avoiding people who wanted to find him. "You've done this before," she said suddenly. Nathan looked up from where he was rubbing Thunder down with a handful of pine needles. "Done what?" "Run. Hidden. Camped in places where you wouldn't be found." Clara gestured around the clearing. "This isn't the first time you've needed to disappear into the wilderness." Nathan's hand stilled for a moment, and Clara thought she saw something flicker across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. "You're observant," he said finally. "I'm a mail carrier's daughter," Clara replied, echoing her earlier words. "We learn to read terrain, to understand what makes a good campsite and what doesn't. This place..." She shook her head slowly. "This is perfect. Too perfect to be an accident." Nathan resumed his work on Thunder, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. "I've been tracking the Bitter Creek gang for 8 months, he said quietly. "That means 8 months of staying one step ahead of them, sleeping in places where they wouldn't think to look, moving before they could pick up my trail. You learn things, and now you've dragged me into it." The words came out more bitter than Clara had intended, and she saw Nathan's jaw tighten. "I didn't drag you into anything," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "You were already in it up to your neck. I just changed the terms." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "We changed the terms? Is that what you call it? One minute I'm Jonas Carver's prisoner. The next I'm running through the mountains with a stranger who may or may not be planning to..." "To what?" Nathan's voice was sharp now, and he straightened to face her fully. "What exactly do you think I'm planning to do with you?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Clara found herself unable to meet his gaze, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. The truth was, she didn't know what to think. Every man she'd encountered since her father's death had seen her as nothing more than a commodity. Something to be won, lost, traded, or taken by force. The idea that Nathan might be different seemed too good to be true. "I don't know," she whispered finally. "I don't know anything anymore." Nathan's expression softened, and he moved closer, settling onto a boulder near her log but maintaining a careful distance. "Look at me, Clara." Reluctantly, she raised her eyes to meet his. "I know you got no reason to trust me," Nathan said, his voice quiet but firm. "Hell, if I was in your position, I'd be just as suspicious. But I want you to understand something. I didn't win you in that card game because I wanted to own you. I won you because I needed to get you away from Jonas before his friends arrived." Clara's brow furrowed in confusion. "His friends?" Nathan nodded grimly. "I've been watching that saloon for 3 days, waiting for the right moment to make my move. Yesterday morning, I saw riders heading into town, rough men with the look of the Owl Hoot Trail about them. They met with Jonas briefly, then rode out again. But they'll be back." "How do you know?" "Because I recognized one of them." Nathan's voice carried a weight of old pain. "Samuel Black Sam Morrison, one of the founding members of the Bitter Creek gang, the man who personally put a bullet in my brother's head." Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "But you knew they were coming back." "Tonight. I think maybe tomorrow at the latest. They were making preparations for something. I could see it in the way they moved, the way they talked. Jonas was getting ready for a celebration." Nathan's hands clenched into fists. A celebration that was going to feature you as the main entertainment. The implication hit Clara like a physical blow, and she felt bile rise in her throat. She'd known Jonas had plans for her, but hearing it stated so baldly made it real in a way that terrified her. But the explosion, she said weakly, the fire, that changed everything. Maybe, or maybe it just made them angrier. Nathan stood and walked to the edge of the stream, staring out into the darkness beyond. The Bitter Creek gang doesn't give up easy. They'll track us if they can, and they've got resources most lawmen only dream of. Safe houses, informants, men willing to kill for a few pieces of silver. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling very small and very alone. So what happens now? Do we just keep running forever? Nathan was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a note of something that might have been hope. I've got a cabin, he said finally. About 2 days' ride from here, hidden in a valley that's not on any map. Built it myself after Jacob died, as a place to plan and prepare. It's got supplies, clean water, and enough defensible positions to hold off a small army if it comes to that. And then? Nathan pulled his knife from his belt and began cutting strips of rawhide from his saddlebags, the kind of cord used to secure a prisoner's hands. Clara tensed, ready to run. But instead of approaching her, Nathan laid the knife aside and began working the leather with his fingers, stretching and softening it. Then I finish what I started, he said, his attention apparently focused on his work. The Bitter Creek gang has been terrorizing this territory for 5 years. They've killed dozens of people, burned out homesteads, robbed stages and supply trains. The territorial authorities either can't catch them or won't try hard enough. He looked up at Clara then, and she saw something fierce and determined in his gray eyes. But I know their methods, their habits, their weaknesses, and now, thanks to you, I might know something else as well. What do you mean? Nathan set aside the leather strips and moved back toward her, but stopped when he saw her tense. Instead, he knelt down near the log where she sat, bringing himself to her eye level. Clara, he said quietly, I need you to understand something. Those ropes I just cut from your wrists, I'm not planning to replace them. You're not my prisoner, and you're not my property. As soon as I can get you somewhere safe, you'll be free to go wherever you want, do whatever you choose. He paused, studying her face in the moonlight. But before that happens, I need to know, during those 3 days you were Jonas's prisoner, did you see anything? Hear anything? Maps, names, plans? Anything that might help me track down the rest of the gang? Clara stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. The idea of freedom, real freedom, seemed like an impossible dream after everything she'd been through. But something in Nathan's voice, in the way he held himself, made her want to believe. There was a map, she said slowly, in Jonas's saddlebags. He looked at it every night, marking routes and circling places. I couldn't see it clearly, but I heard him talking to his men about winter camps and supply caches. Nathan's eyes sharpened with interest. What kind of places? Towns? Geographic features? Both. There was mention of a place called Bitter Creek. I assume that's where they got their name. And something about a box canyon with a hidden entrance, somewhere north of the Colorado border. Clara frowned, trying to remember details. They talked about it like it was their main stronghold, the place they go when things get too hot elsewhere. Bitter Creek Canyon, Nathan murmured, and Clara saw recognition flash across his face. I've heard rumors of such a place, but I could never pin down its location. There's more, Clara said, surprising herself with her willingness to help. Jonas mentioned a supply run, weapons and ammunition being brought in from Denver. He was expecting a large shipment within the next 2 weeks. Nathan leaned forward, his excitement barely contained. When? Where? I don't know exactly, but they were planning to intercept it somewhere along the mountain route between Denver and the mining camps. Jonas seemed to think it would be easy pickings, a small guard detail and enough firepower to supply an army. Nathan sat back on his heels, his mind clearly racing with possibilities. If we could intercept that shipment ourselves, turn it over to the territorial marshal. We? Clara's voice was sharp with alarm. I'm not a fighter. Nathan, I'm just a woman who wants to survive long enough to start over somewhere far from here. I know, Nathan said quickly. I'm not asking you to fight. I'm just thinking out loud. He stood and walked back to Thunder, who was now contentedly cropping grass near the stream. The truth is, Clara, I've been hunting these men for months without getting close enough to matter. They're too smart, too well organized, too careful. But now, for the first time, I might have information that could make a real difference. Clara watched him check Thunder's gear, her mind churning with conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted nothing more than to find the nearest town with a railroad station and disappear into the anonymous masses of the growing nation. But another part of her, a part she didn't entirely understand, was drawn to this quiet, determined man who seemed to genuinely care about justice rather than just revenge. The cabin you mentioned, she said finally. How long would we stay there? Nathan looked at her with something that might have been hope. As long as you need to decide what you want to do next. Days, weeks, whatever it takes for you to feel safe again. Clara nodded slowly. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was more than she'd had since this nightmare began. And for the first time since her father's death, she was dealing with a man who seemed to see her as a person rather than a possession. All right, she said quietly. I'll come to your cabin. But I want your word. When I'm ready to leave, you'll help me get to a town where I can start over. You have it, Nathan said without hesitation. As he helped her back onto Thunder's broad back, Clara found herself wondering if she was making another terrible mistake. But as they rode deeper into the mountain wilderness, she realized that for the first time in days, she wasn't entirely afraid of what tomorrow might bring. It was, she thought, a start. The campfire cast dancing shadows on the walls of granite that surrounded their small refuge, its warm light pushing back the mountain darkness and creating an island of safety in the vast wilderness. Nathan had built it expertly, using dry wood that produced little smoke and positioning it so the flames couldn't be seen from the valley below. The smell of coffee mingled with the crisp mountain air, and for the first time in days, Clara felt something approaching peace. They had been traveling for most of the day, following deer trails and dry creek beds through terrain that seemed untouched by human presence. Nathan's hidden valley was still a day's ride away, but he'd found them shelter in a natural cave formed by an overhang of red sandstone, the kind of place that would be invisible to anyone not specifically looking for it. Clara sat on her bedroll near the fire, slowly working a comb through her tangled auburn hair. Nathan had surprised her by producing the comb from his saddlebags, along with a bar of soap and a clean shirt that was far too large for her but infinitely better than the torn dress she'd been wearing. The simple acts of washing in the stream and changing clothes had made her feel more human than she had in days. Better? Nathan asked, looking up from where he was cleaning his rifle by the firelight. Much, Clara replied, though she kept her voice carefully neutral. Trust was still a fragile thing between them, built on small gestures and cautious words rather than any deep understanding. Nathan nodded and returned to his work. running an oiled cloth along the barrel with the methodical precision of a man who understood that his life might depend on his weapon's reliability. The ritual was clearly familiar to him, and Clara found herself wondering how many nights he'd spent like this, alone in the wilderness, tending his gear and planning his next move in the deadly game he'd been playing with the Bitter Creek gang. "You never told me your last name," Clara said suddenly, the words coming out before she could stop them. Nathan's hands stilled for a moment. "Cole," he said finally. "Nathan Cole. And your brother, Jacob Cole." Clara tested the name on her tongue, trying to imagine the young man who died for crossing the wrong people. "Tell me about him." Nathan set down his rifle and stared into the fire, his gray eyes reflecting the dancing flames. For a long moment, Clara thought he wouldn't answer, and she began to regret asking such a personal question. But then he began to speak, his voice low and distant. "Jacob was everything I wasn't," he said. "Where I was careful, he was reckless. Where I planned, he acted on impulse. But he had this light about him, this way of making people smile just by being in the same room." Nathan picked up a stick and poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling up into the darkness. "Our parents died when we were young. Cholera took them both the same winter. Jacob was only 8, and I was 15. I tried to take care of him, but it was hard. We moved around a lot, taking whatever work we could find. I learned to track and hunt, became good with a gun. Jacob learned to charm his way out of trouble." "What happened?" Clara asked gently. "How did he get mixed up with the gang?" Nathan's jaw tightened. "Women. There was always a woman at the center of Jacob's troubles. This time, it was a saloon girl in Santa Fe named Maria Santos. Pretty as a picture and twice as dangerous. She was already involved with Samuel Morrison, Black Sam. But Jacob didn't know that when he started courting her." Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. She was beginning to understand where this story was leading. "Jacob thought he was in love," Nathan continued, his voice growing harder. "Talked about marrying her, taking her away from the saloon life. He even started saving money for a ring. What he didn't know was that Maria was feeding information about his comings and goings to Black Sam, setting him up for what happened next." Nathan stood abruptly and walked to the edge of their small camp, staring out into the darkness beyond the firelight. "They caught him on the road between Santa Fe and Albuquerque. 3 men, Black Sam, Jonas Carver, and a killer named Tom Brennan. They beat him first, broke both his legs so he couldn't run. Then they took their time." Clara's hand went to her throat, imagining the terror Jacob must have felt in those final moments. Dear God. When they found his body, he'd been dead for 2 weeks. Animals had gotten to him, but the territorial marshal could still see what they'd done. The ace of spades nailed to his chest was their signature, a calling card to let everyone know that this was what happened to people who crossed the Bitter Creek gang. Nathan turned back to face her, and Clara saw something in his eyes that made her shiver. Not just pain, but a cold fury that had been burning for months without outlet. "I tracked down Maria first," he said quietly. "Found her in a cantina in El Paso, drunk and babbling about how sorry she was. She told me everything, how Black Sam had threatened to hurt her if she didn't help them, how she'd never meant for Jacob to die. Maybe it was even true. But my brother was still dead." "What did you do to her?" Nathan's smile was cold as winter wind. "Nothing. I didn't have to. Word was already out about what had happened, and nobody in that part of the territory would have anything to do with a woman who'd betrayed an innocent man to killers. Last I heard, she was working the mining camps up in Colorado, selling herself for enough money to stay drunk. That seemed punishment enough. Clara absorbed this information in silence, trying to reconcile the gentle man who'd cut her bonds and offered her his protection with the cold-eyed hunter who'd tracked down his brother's betrayer. She was beginning to understand that Nathan Cole was a man of contradictions, capable of great kindness and terrible vengeance in equal measure. "Is that when you started hunting them?" she asked. "Not right away. First, I tried working with the law. Went to every territorial marshal and federal judge I could find, told them what I knew about the gang's operations. But they all said the same thing: not enough evidence. Jurisdiction problems too dangerous to pursue without more resources." Nathan sat back down by the fire, his expression bitter. The truth was, nobody wanted to tangle with the Bitter Creek gang. They were too well organized, too ruthless, and they had too many friends in high places. Easier to just let them operate and hope they'd move on to someone else's territory. So you decided to take matters into your own hands. What choice did I have? Jacob was just as dead whether the law cared or not, and every day I waited, more innocent people were suffering at their hands. Nathan met her eyes across the fire. "I may not be able to give my brother justice through the courts, but I can sure as hell give him vengeance." Clara studied his face in the firelight, seeing the pain and determination that drove him. She thought about her own father, gambling away his daughter's freedom to men who would have used her in ways that didn't bear thinking about. In a strange way, she and Nathan were both victims of the same evil: the Bitter Creek gang's casual cruelty toward anyone unfortunate enough to cross their path. "What about your story?" Nathan asked suddenly. "You said your father was a mail carrier. What happened to him after Jonas took you?" Clara's hands clenched in her lap, and for a moment she couldn't speak. The memory of that night was still too raw, too painful to examine closely. "They killed him," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not right away. Jonas wanted to keep him alive in case he needed leverage over me, but Daddy couldn't live with what he'd done. On the second night, he tried to escape, tried to get help from the territorial marshal in Silver Creek." She paused, wiping tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand. "Jonas caught him about 5 miles from town, brought him back and made an example of him in front of the whole gang. Said it was a lesson about what happened to people who didn't honor their debts." Nathan's face had gone very still. "How?" "They hanged him from a cottonwood tree behind the saloon. But they didn't do it quick, didn't break his neck clean. They wanted him to suffer, wanted me to watch." Clara's voice broke completely. "He was still alive when they cut him down, still trying to say he was sorry. He died in my arms, begging my forgiveness for something that wasn't even his fault." Nathan moved around the fire and knelt beside her, his large hands gentle on her shoulders. "Clara, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked." "No," she said, looking up at him through her tears. "I'm glad you did. I needed to tell someone. Needed someone to know that he wasn't a bad man. Just a weak one who made a terrible mistake. Men like Jonas Carver prey on weakness," Nathan said softly. "They find decent people in desperate situations and twist their desperation into something they can use. Your father was as much a victim as you were." Clara leaned into his touch, drawing comfort from his steady presence. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt truly safe, not just physically protected, but emotionally understood by someone who'd experienced similar loss. "The worst part," she whispered, "was knowing that Daddy died thinking I hated him for what he'd done. I never got the chance to tell him I forgave him." Nathan's arms came around her then, holding her while she cried out months of grief and fear and rage. He didn't try to comfort her with empty words or false promises. just offered his presence and his strength until the storm of emotions passed. When she finally pulled back, wiping her eyes with the oversized shirt he'd given her, Clara felt lighter somehow, as if sharing her story had lifted some of the burden she'd been carrying alone. "Thank you," she said simply. Nathan nodded, his gray eyes serious. "We both lost family to these animals. That gives us something in common, something to build on." Build on toward what? Nathan was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of decision that hadn't been there before. "I told you I had information about a weapons shipment coming from Denver. What I didn't tell you was that I think I know where they're planning to intercept it. There's a narrow pass about 50 miles north of here, the only practical route for heavily loaded wagons traveling between Denver and the mining camps. If I'm right, the Bitter Creek gang will be waiting there within the next week." Clara felt her stomach clench with sudden understanding. "You're going after them." "Yes, but not alone, and not unprepared. I've been planning this for months, gathering information, studying their methods. This shipment could be the break I've been waiting for, the chance to strike a real blow against their operations. And if you're wrong, if it's a trap," Nathan's smile was grim but determined, "then at least I'll die knowing I tried to give Jacob the justice he deserved. And maybe, just maybe, I'll take a few of them with me." Clara stared at him across the fire, seeing the resolution in his face and knowing that nothing she could say would change his mind. Nathan Cole had been carrying this burden of vengeance for too long to set it down now, not when he was finally close to his goal. But she also saw something else in his expression, a loneliness that matched her own, a need for connection that went deeper than their shared tragedy. They were both damaged people trying to find their way through a world that had shown them little kindness. And perhaps that was enough to build something meaningful upon. "Your cabin," she said finally. "How long before we reach it?" "Tomorrow evening, if we make good time." Clara nodded, making her own decision. "Then we'll talk more when we get there. About the weapons shipment, about your plans, about what comes next for both of us." Nathan studied her face in the firelight, perhaps seeing something there that gave him hope. "You don't have to be part of this, Clara. I meant what I said about getting you somewhere safe." "I know," she replied quietly. "But maybe it's time I stopped running from the things that frighten me. Maybe it's time I started fighting back." As the fire burned low and the mountain night settled around them, both Nathan and Clara found themselves looking ahead to a future that was uncertain but no longer entirely hopeless. They had found each other in the darkness, two souls bound by tragedy but strengthened by the possibility of something better. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, and new dangers. But tonight, they had this, a small fire in the wilderness. Shared stories of loss and pain, and the fragile beginning of trust between two people who desperately needed to believe that they weren't entirely alone in the world. Nathan's hidden valley revealed itself like a secret whispered by the mountains themselves. After 2 days of hard riding through increasingly treacherous terrain, they crested a narrow ridge to find a green oasis nestled between towering walls of red sandstone. A crystal stream meandered through the valley floor, fed by a waterfall that cascaded down the far cliff face in a curtain of silver and mist. The cabin sat on a natural shelf halfway up the eastern wall, built from local stone and timber in a way that made it almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. "Dear Lord," Clara breathed, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "It's beautiful." Nathan's face showed a rare smile as he guided Thunder down the hidden trail that switchbacked along the valley wall. "Jacob always said I had good taste in real estate." Course, he also said I was crazy for building a place this far from civilization. The cabin was larger than Clara had expected, with solid stone walls and a roof made from split logs sealed with pine pitch. A wide porch faced west toward the setting sun, and she could see gun ports cut into the walls, subtle but effective defensive features that spoke to Nathan's military experience. Behind the main structure, a smaller building served as a stable and storage shed, while a vegetable garden showed signs of careful tending despite its owner's long absence. "You built all this yourself?" Clara asked as Nathan helped her down from Thunder's back. "Most of it. Had some help with the heavy stonework from a Ute named Running Bear who I'd done a favor for. But yeah, every board and every stone was placed with my own hands." Nathan's voice carried a note of quiet pride. "Took me the better part of a year, working whenever I wasn't tracking leads on the gang." Inside, the cabin was simple but comfortable, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall and handmade furniture that showed real craftsmanship. Maps covered a large table in the center of the room, held down by stones and marked with pins and colored string. Books lined shelves built into the walls, everything from military treatises to poetry collections, suggesting depths to Nathan's character that Clara was only beginning to discover. But it was the far wall that truly caught her attention. It was covered with papers, photographs, and newspaper clippings, all connected by red string like a spider's web of evidence. At the center was a hand-drawn map of the territories, marked with dates and locations. To one side, photographs of men's faces stared out with the hard eyes of professional killers, each one labeled with a name and a list of known crimes. "Your hunting board," Clara said, her voice soft with understanding. Nathan nodded grimly. "Everything I've learned about the Bitter Creek Gang in 8 months of tracking, their patterns, their associates, their known hideouts. I've been trying to map their organization, figure out how they operate and where they're vulnerable." Clara approached the wall, studying the faces and reading the descriptions beneath them. Jonas Carver's photograph occupied a prominent position, but it was the larger portrait at the center that drew her eye. A man in his 40s with cold blue eyes and a scar running from his left ear to the corner of his mouth. "Samuel Morrison," she said, reading the name beneath the photograph. "Black Sam himself, leader of the gang, and the man who personally killed my brother." Nathan's voice was carefully controlled, but Clara could hear the rage burning beneath the surface. "He's been operating in this territory for 6 years, and in that time he's built the most successful criminal organization west of the Mississippi." Nathan moved to stand beside her, pointing to different photographs as he spoke. "This is Tom Brennan, his lieutenant and the gang's enforcer. This is Maria Santos. She may be in Colorado now, but she's still feeding them information about potential targets. And these." He gestured to a row of smaller photographs. "These are the men who make up the core of his operation. 15 killers and thieves who've terrorized this territory long enough." Clara studied the faces, committing them to memory. "How many men does he have in total?" "Hard to say. The core group numbers may be 20, but they've got associates and part-time allies scattered across 3 territories. When they need manpower for a big job, they can call in favors and field close to 50 men." Nathan's expression was grim. "More than enough to overrun any sheriff's posse or territorial marshal force, but not more than the army could handle," Clara observed. Nathan's laugh was bitter. "You'd think so, wouldn't you? But the army's got bigger problems than one outlaw gang. They're dealing with Apache raids, cattle rustlers, claim jumpers, and a dozen other crises. By the time they could organize a proper expedition, Black Sam and his boys would be long gone, scattered to the four winds. Clara moved to the large table in the center of the room, studying the maps spread across its surface. They showed the territory in incredible detail, with routes marked in different colors and notations written in Nathan's careful hand. "You've been planning something," she said, her voice carrying both curiosity and concern. "Something big." Nathan joined her at the table, his finger tracing one of the marked routes. "The weapons shipment you told me about, it's given me an idea, a way to strike at the heart of their operation instead of just picking off stragglers." He pointed to a narrow mountain pass marked in red ink. "Devil's Canyon. It's the only practical route for heavily loaded wagons traveling between Denver and the mining camps. The road is narrow, with steep cliffs on both sides and limited visibility. Perfect place for an ambush. You think that's where they'll intercept the shipment? I'm certain of it. I've studied their methods for months, and they always choose locations that give them maximum tactical advantage. Devil's Canyon has been used for ambushes by everyone from Apache war parties to Mexican bandits. It's practically designed for highway robbery." Nathan pulled out a detailed sketch of the canyon, showing the road winding between towering rock walls. "The gang will position men on both rims, probably with rifles to pin down the guards while a blocking force stops the wagons. Quick, efficient, and almost impossible to defend against if you don't know it's coming." Clara studied the sketch, her mind working through the implications. "But you do know it's coming. So what's your plan? Warn the authorities? Set up a counter-ambush?" Nathan's smile was cold and predatory. "Something like that, but not just to stop one robbery, to destroy the entire organization." He moved to another map, this one showing a broader area of the territory. "The weapons they're after aren't just for their own use. Black Sam has been building an empire, selling arms to anyone with the money to pay. Rustlers, claim jumpers, even renegade Indian bands. It's become a major source of income for the gang, and they've got a sophisticated distribution network. I don't understand. How does stopping one shipment destroy their whole operation?" Nathan's eyes gleamed with anticipation. "Because they're not just going to steal those weapons, they're going to store them at their main supply depot while they arrange for buyers. And thanks to what you overheard, I think I know where that depot is." Clara felt a chill of understanding. "The Box Canyon, the hidden stronghold you mentioned. Bitter Creek Canyon. I've been searching for it for months, following rumors and tracking supply trains through the wilderness. But I could never pin down its exact location." Nathan's voice carried a note of excitement. "If I could find that place, if I could locate their main base of operations." "You could strike at everything they've built," Clara finished, her voice soft with realization. "Destroy their supplies, their money, their ability to operate." "Exactly. And the beauty of it is, they won't see it coming, while they're celebrating their successful robbery and counting their profits. I'll be burning their empire to the ground." Clara stared at the maps, trying to process the scope of what Nathan was proposing. It wasn't just revenge, it was war. A calculated campaign to destroy an entire criminal organization. The boldness of it was both inspiring and terrifying. "It's suicide," she said finally. "Even if you could find this canyon, even if you could get inside their stronghold, you're talking about taking on 20 armed men by yourself. The odds are impossible." Nathan's expression grew thoughtful. "Maybe. But I've got advantages they don't know about. 8 months of studying their methods, their routines, their weaknesses. I know how they think, how they operate. And they don't know I exist, to them. I'm just another nameless drifter who happened to win a lucky hand of poker." He moved back to the hunting board, studying the photographs and notes with the intensity of a general planning a campaign. The key is timing. I let them execute their ambush, steal the weapons, and return to their canyon feeling secure and successful. Then, when their guard is down, I strike. How? Nathan's smile was grim. Fire. Their whole operation depends on the supplies they've stockpiled. Food, ammunition, gold from previous robberies. Burn that, and you cripple their ability to operate. Force them out into the open where the law can deal with them. Clara felt her heart racing as she began to understand the full scope of Nathan's plan. It was audacious, dangerous, and probably doomed to failure. But it was also the kind of decisive action that could break the gang's power permanently. "You're serious about this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dead serious. This is my chance, maybe my only chance to give Jacob the justice he deserves and protect other innocent people from suffering the same fate." Clara moved away from the table, walking to the window that looked out over the peaceful valley. The contrast between the serene beauty outside and the violent plans being discussed inside was almost overwhelming. "What about me?" she asked, not turning around. "What's my role in this grand campaign of yours?" Nathan's voice was gentle when he answered. "You don't have a role unless you choose one. I meant what I said about getting you somewhere safe. There's a stagecoach station 2 days' ride south of here. You could be on your way to California or back east within a week." Clara turned to face him, studying his expression carefully. "But you'd rather I stayed?" "I'd rather you were safe," Nathan replied, though something in his eyes suggested that wasn't the complete truth. "But if you chose to stay, if you chose to help, I won't lie to you, Clara. I could use your knowledge of the gang's operations, and having someone I trust watching my back could make the difference between success and failure." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Clara realized that they had reached a crossroads, not just in Nathan's campaign against the Bitter Creek gang, but in whatever was growing between them. "You're asking me to risk my life for a man I barely know, to help you fight a war that isn't mine to fight." "I'm asking you to help me save lives," Nathan corrected gently. "Every day the Bitter Creek gang operates, more innocent people suffer. More fathers lose their daughters. More children lose their parents. You've seen what they're capable of, Clara. You know what they do to people who can't fight back." Clara thought about her father's broken body, about the terror she'd felt during those 3 days as Jonas's prisoner, about the burning town they'd left behind. Nathan was right. This was about more than personal revenge. It was about stopping a cancer that had been spreading through the territory unchecked for too long. "If I agreed to help," she said carefully, "what would you need from me?" Nathan's eyes lit up with hope, though he kept his voice controlled. "Information, mainly. Details about the gang's habits, their routines, anything that might help me plan the assault on their stronghold. And—" he hesitated, as if unsure whether to continue. "And away inside, the canyon will be heavily guarded, and getting past their sentries undetected will be nearly impossible for a lone man. But a woman, especially one they think is dead or missing." Clara felt her blood run cold as she realized what he was suggesting. "You want me to walk into their stronghold voluntarily, to let them capture me?" "It would only be for a few hours," Nathan said quickly. "Long enough for me to get inside and start the fires. Then I'd get you out, and we'd escape in the confusion." The plan was insane, requiring perfect timing and absolute trust between 2 people who had known each other for less than a week. Clara thought about all the things that could go wrong, all the ways it could end in disaster for both of them. But she also thought about the alternative, spending the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, wondering when the Bitter Creek gang would find her and finish what they'd started in Deadwood Gulch. "I need time to think about this," she said finally. Nathan nodded, understanding written across his weathered features. "Of course. Take all the time you need. We've got at least a week before the weapons shipment arrives, and I've got supplies to gather and preparations to make either way." As the sun set over the hidden valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Clara found herself standing at a crossroads that would define the rest of her life. Behind her lay safety, the chance to disappear and start over in a place where no one knew her history. Ahead lay danger, uncertainty, and the possibility of striking a real blow against the evil that had destroyed everything she'd ever known. The choice, she realized, was entirely hers to make. The morning sun painted Bitter Creek Canyon in shades of gold and crimson, its light filtering through the natural stone archway that served as the only entrance to the hidden stronghold. Clara sat on a flat boulder outside the cave that had sheltered her and Nathan for the past 3 days, watching the bustle of activity below as the Bitter Creek gang celebrated their latest triumph. The weapons raid had gone exactly as Nathan predicted, 24 hours earlier. Jonas Carver and his men had ambushed the military supply convoy in Devil's Canyon, making off with enough rifles and ammunition to outfit a small army. Now the stolen goods were being sorted and cataloged in the canyon below, while the gang members counted their expected profits and planned how to distribute the weapons to their various buyers. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the torn dress Nathan had carefully damaged to make her look like a prisoner who'd been roughly handled during days of captivity. The irony wasn't lost on her. After escaping Jonas's clutches once, she was now voluntarily walking back into the lion's den. But this time, she wasn't helpless prey. This time, she was the hunter. "You sure about the signal?" Nathan asked for the 3rd time that morning, his gray eyes dark with concern. Clara nodded, touching the small piece of white cloth tucked into her sleeve. 3 tugs on the rope, then a pause, then 2 more. "You'll be watching from the rimrock?" "Every second. The moment I see that signal, I'll start moving." Nathan's jaw was tight with tension. "But Clara, if something goes wrong, if they suspect..." "They won't." Clara's voice was steadier than she felt. "Jonas thinks I'm dead, burned up in that saloon fire. The last thing he'll expect is for me to walk back into his camp voluntarily." The plan was audacious in its simplicity. Clara would approach the canyon as a lost traveler seeking help, allowing herself to be captured and brought to Jonas. While the gang leader gloated over his unexpected prize, Nathan would use the distraction to infiltrate the storage caves where the weapons and supplies were kept. A few well-placed charges, a signal from Clara, and the entire stronghold would go up in flames. Of course, they both knew how many things could go wrong. If Jonas decided to hurt Clara immediately instead of savoring his victory, if the guards spotted Nathan during his approach, if the explosives failed to detonate properly, any of a dozen variables could turn their carefully planned operation into a death trap. "I should be the one going down there," Nathan said, his voice rough with emotion. "This is my fight, my responsibility." Clara reached out and touched his hand, feeling the calluses and scars that told the story of his hard life. "And it's my choice to help you, and we've been over this. Nathan, a lone man trying to infiltrate their stronghold, would be spotted and killed before he got within 100 yards of those caves. But a helpless woman, especially one they think has valuable information, that's a different story." Nathan's fingers intertwined with hers, and she saw something in his eyes that made her heart race. Over the past week, their partnership had deepened into something more than shared purpose. The long hours of planning, the quiet conversations by the campfire, the gradual building of trust between two wounded souls. It had all led to this moment when everything they'd built together hung in the balance. "When this is over," Nathan said quietly, "when the gang is finished and Jacob's death is avenged, what then? What do we do?" Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but she kept her voice steady. "We figure it out together. If we both live through this, we'll have all the time in the world to decide what comes next." The sound of horses approaching from the canyon mouth made them both freeze. Nathan grabbed his spyglass and peered down at the riders emerging from the shadows. "It's him," he breathed. "Black Sam Morrison. He's returning from somewhere, and he's got about 6 men with him." Clara's blood ran cold as she saw the man who'd killed Nathan's brother riding into the stronghold like a conquering hero. Even at this distance, there was something terrifying about Samuel Morrison, the way he sat his horse, the casual arrogance of his movements, the deference shown by the other gang members as he passed. "This complicates things," Nathan muttered, lowering the spyglass. "With Black Sam here, security will be tighter. They'll be more suspicious of strangers, more careful about—" "No," Clara interrupted, her mind racing as a new plan took shape. "This makes it better. Think about it. Jonas has been operating independently while Black Sam was away. Now the leader returns to find that Jonas has not only lost a valuable prisoner but also allowed his favorite saloon to be burned down. Jonas will be desperate to redeem himself." Nathan's eyes sharpened as he followed her logic. And what better way to redeem himself than by recapturing the woman who escaped and bringing her to Black Sam as a peace offering? "Exactly. Jonas won't want to hurt me right away. He'll want to present me to Black Sam. Maybe get some information out of me first. That gives us more time to execute the plan." Nathan studied her face, seeing the determination there. "You're really going to do this. We're really going to do this," Clara corrected. "Together. Just like we planned." Nathan pulled her into his arms then, holding her close as if he could memorize the feeling. When he finally pulled back, his expression was fierce with resolve. "If anything happens to you down there—" "It won't," Clara said firmly. "I'll be careful. I'll follow the plan, and I'll signal you the moment I've located their main supply depot. Then you blow that canyon to Kingdom Come, and we ride out of here together." Nathan nodded, though she could see the fear lurking behind his confidence. "The horses are ready. I've scouted 3 different escape routes, and I've cached supplies at each one. No matter what happens, we'll have options." Clara stood and smoothed down her torn dress, checking to make sure the hidden knife Nathan had given her was secure in her boot. The weight of it was comforting, a reminder that she wasn't entirely defenseless despite appearances. "Time to go," she said, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. Nathan caught her hand as she started down the rocky slope. "Clara, He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. "I know," she said softly. "Me too." They didn't say goodbye. Saying goodbye felt too much like admitting they might not see each other again. Instead, Nathan watched from concealment as Clara made her way down the winding path toward the canyon floor, her movements carefully calculated to look like those of a lost and desperate woman seeking help. The first sentry spotted her when she was still 50 yards from the canyon mouth. She heard the sharp whistle that served as an alarm, then the sound of boots on stone as guards moved to intercept her. Clara forced herself to stumble, to look exhausted and frightened, as 3 armed men emerged from the shadows with rifles trained on her. "Please," she called out, her voice carefully pitched to carry just the right note of desperation. "I'm lost. I've been wandering for days. I just need water, food." "Well, I'll be damned," said the lead guard, a grizzled man with a gray beard and suspicious eyes. "Boys, you know who this is?" Clara's heart hammered against her ribs as the other guards moved closer, studying her face. She kept her expression blank, hoping they wouldn't notice the careful preparation that had gone into her appearance. "Can't say I do. Ezra," said one of the younger men. "Should I?" "This here's that gal who was with Snake Carver in Deadwood Gulch, the one who got away when that stranger burned down Murphy's place." Ezra's grin showed several missing teeth. "Boss has been looking for her ever since." "I don't know what you're talking about," Clara said, backing away as if frightened. "I'm just a traveler. I was separated from my wagon train and I've been lost for—" "Save it, Missy," Ezra interrupted, signaling to his companions. "You're coming with us. The boss is going to be real interested to see you again." They bound her hands with rough rope and marched her into the canyon, past guards posted at strategic points and into the main encampment. Clara kept her eyes down, playing the part of a defeated prisoner while secretly cataloging everything she saw. The layout of the camp, the number of men, the location of the supply caves carved into the canyon walls. The stolen weapons were stacked in neat piles near the center of the camp, being sorted by men who clearly knew their business. Rifles, pistols, ammunition crates, and even a few small cannons, enough firepower to outfit a private army. But it was the caves themselves that drew Clara's attention. At least 6 of them had been converted into storage areas, their entrances guarded and their interiors hidden from view. "Looky what we found wandering the desert," Ezra called out as they approached the main fire pit where Jonas Carver sat drinking coffee with several other gang members. Jonas's head snapped up, and Clara saw his face cycle through disbelief, recognition, and savage satisfaction in the space of a heartbeat. He stood slowly, setting down his cup with deliberate care. Well, he said, his voice soft and dangerous. "The little bird has returned to her cage, and here I thought you were nothing but ash and bone." Clara forced herself to meet his gaze, letting just the right amount of defiance show through her fear. "I survived your fire, Jonas, barely, but I survived." "Indeed you did. The question is how and why you're here now instead of halfway to California by rail." Jonas walked around her slowly, like a predator circling wounded prey. "Unless, of course, you missed my hospitality so much that you came back for more." "I got lost," Clara said, sticking to her story. "My guide abandoned me when we heard about Deadwood Gulch burning. I've been wandering for days, following the creek bed, hoping to find civilization." Jonas's laugh was harsh and disbelieving. "Lost? How convenient. And I suppose you had no idea this canyon was here? No knowledge of our operations?" "I don't know anything about your operations," Clara replied with carefully calculated frustration. "I just want food and water and directions to the nearest town." "Oh, you'll get food and water," Jonas said, his smile turning predatory. "But I'm afraid the directions will have to wait. You see, I've got some questions about that night in Deadwood Gulch, about your mysterious rescuer and how he managed to win a hand that should have been impossible." Clara felt a chill of fear that was only partly acting. If Jonas suspected Nathan of cheating at cards, if he thought there was more to their escape than luck and quick thinking, the whole plan could unravel before it even began. "I don't know what you mean," she said. "Some stranger won me in a card game, then dragged me out before your men could stop him. I never even learned his name." "Interesting," Jonas mused. "Because according to my sources, that stranger was asking questions about our operations before he ever sat down at my table, almost like he knew exactly what he was looking for." Before Clara could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats announced the arrival of Black Sam Morrison and his escort. The gang leader rode into the camp like a general inspecting his troops, his cold blue eyes taking in every detail of the scene before him. "Jonas," Black Sam said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man accustomed to absolute obedience. "I see you found some entertainment while I was away." Jonas straightened, and Clara could see the nervous respect in his posture. "Boss, this is the woman I told you about, the one who escaped from Deadwood Gulch. She just wandered into our canyon, claims she's lost." Black Sam dismounted and approached, studying Clara with the dispassionate interest of a man examining livestock. When he spoke, his voice was soft but carried an edge that made her skin crawl. "Lost," he repeated thoughtfully. "How unfortunate for her. How fortunate for us." He reached out and lifted Clara's chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. His eyes were the color of winter ice, and she saw something in them that made her understand why men feared him. "We're going to have a long conversation. You and I," Black Sam said quietly. "About your mysterious rescuer, about what you might have seen or heard during your captivity, about who else might know the location of this canyon." Clara forced herself not to flinch away from his touch. "I don't know anything. I was just—" "Shh," Black Sam interrupted, pressing a finger to her lips. "Save your strength. You'll need it for what comes next." He turned to Jonas, his expression businesslike. "Put her in the storage cave with the new weapons. Post guards. I want to finish organizing our recent acquisition before I begin questioning our guest." As rough hands grabbed her arms and began dragging her toward the caves, Clara caught sight of movement on the canyon rim, just a flash of reflected sunlight that could have been anything. But she knew it was Nathan keeping watch, waiting for her signal. The storage cave was larger than she'd expected, carved deep into the sandstone and filled with crates of weapons, barrels of gunpowder, and sacks of supplies. They tied her to a support post near the center of the space, leaving her in darkness except for the faint light filtering in from the entrance. Perfect, Clara thought, feeling for the white cloth hidden in her sleeve. Now all she had to do was wait for the right moment. Signal Nathan, and pray that their desperate plan would work. Outside, she could hear Black Sam giving orders, organizing his men, preparing for whatever interrogation he had planned. But he didn't know that he'd just placed his most valuable prisoner in the exact location where Nathan needed to strike. Clara closed her eyes and began counting the minutes, waiting for her chance to light the fuse that would bring down the Bitter Creek Gang's empire once and for all. The explosion shattered the pre-dawn silence of Bitter Creek Canyon like the wrath of God himself. Clara felt the ground beneath her tremble as Nathan's carefully placed charges detonated in sequence, turning the gang's main supply depot into a roaring inferno that lit up the canyon walls in hellish orange and red. The concussion knocked her to her knees, and for a moment she could hear nothing but the ringing in her ears and the thunderous roar of destruction. Then the screaming began. Men poured from the various caves and shelters throughout the canyon. Some half-dressed and confused, others already reaching for weapons as they tried to comprehend what was happening to their stronghold. The carefully organized stacks of stolen weapons were now twisted metal scattered across the canyon floor, while barrels of gunpowder continued to explode in a deadly fireworks display that sent debris raining down like hail. Clara pressed herself against the canyon wall, trying to stay invisible as chaos erupted around her. The white cloth signal she'd dropped from the storage cave had done its work. Nathan had seen it and begun his assault exactly as planned. Now all she had to do was survive the next few minutes until he could reach her. "The weapons!" Black Sam Morrison's voice cut through the din like a whip crack. "Save what you can and find out how this happened." But there was precious little to save. Nathan's charges had been perfectly placed, turning the gang's accumulated wealth into smoke and flame. Years of careful planning, months of stockpiling supplies and weapons, gone in a matter of seconds. Clara felt a fierce satisfaction as she watched Jonas Carver stagger through the wreckage, his face blackened with soot and twisted with rage. A hand grabbed her shoulder, and Clara spun around to find Nathan emerging from the smoke like an avenging spirit. His clothes were singed and his face streaked with dirt, but his gray eyes burned with the cold fire of justice finally served. "Time to go," he said simply, pulling her to her feet. They ran together through the chaos, using the confusion and smoke as cover. Nathan had memorized every pathway and hiding spot during his reconnaissance, and he led her with the sure-footed confidence of a man who'd planned for exactly this moment. Behind them, Black Sam's voice rose above the tumult as he tried to organize his men, but the damage was too extensive and the panic too complete for any effective response. "There!" Jonas Carver's voice rang out from somewhere in the smoke. "The woman! She's escaping!" Gunshots cracked through the air, bullets whining off the canyon walls as they zigzagged toward the hidden path that led to the rim. Nathan drew his Colt and returned fire, not aiming to kill but to keep their pursuers at bay while they climbed. Clara's lungs burned from the smoke and exertion, but she forced herself to keep moving, driven by the knowledge that capture now would mean a death far worse than a quick bullet. They reached the narrow ledge where Nathan had cached their horses just as the first pursuit party emerged from the main canyon. Thunder and the mare Nathan had acquired for Clara were saddled and ready, their reins tied to a stunted pine that grew from a crack in the rock. "Ride!" Nathan shouted, swinging into his saddle. "Don't look back, don't slow down, just ride!" They thundered along the rim of the canyon as more gunshots echoed behind them. The explosion had awakened every living thing for miles around. Birds wheeled overhead in confused flocks, and Clara could hear the distant howling of coyotes disturbed from their sleep. But it was the sound of pursuit that made her lean low over her horse's neck and urge the animal to greater speed. Black Sam Morrison had not built his empire by accepting defeat gracefully. Even with his stronghold in ruins and his organization scattered, he would not simply let them escape. The hunt was on, and Clara knew that it would not end until either they reached safety or the Bitter Creek gang extracted their terrible revenge. They rode hard through the pre-dawn darkness, following deer trails and creek beds that Nathan had scouted during their preparation. The man who had once been a bounty hunter knew every trick of pursuit and evasion, and he used them all as they put distance between themselves and the burning canyon. As the first light of dawn painted the eastern horizon pink and gold, they finally stopped to rest their horses at a hidden spring Nathan knew. The animals were lathered with sweat despite the cool morning air, and both riders were exhausted from the night's work. "Is it over?" Clara asked, her voice hoarse from smoke and shouting. Nathan checked his pocket watch and nodded grimly. "The fire will burn for hours yet. By the time it dies down, there won't be enough left of their supplies to outfit a church social, let alone a criminal enterprise." He moved to his saddlebags and pulled out a leather pouch that clinked with the sound of gold coins. This was in Black Sam's personal quarters. "I figure it's payment for all the suffering they've caused." Clara stared at the pouch, understanding its significance. "That's enough to start over anywhere we want." "Anywhere you want," Nathan corrected gently. "I gave you my word that you'd be free to choose your own path once this was finished." The moment Clara had been dreading had finally arrived. Throughout their desperate partnership, she'd avoided thinking about what would happen when their mission was complete. Now, with the Bitter Creek gang's power broken and their stronghold destroyed, she was faced with the same choice that had confronted her a week ago: safety and solitude, or the uncertain future that lay in staying with Nathan Cole. "What about you?" she asked. "What will you do now that Jacob's death has been avenged?" Nathan was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the vast landscape that stretched to the horizon. "I don't rightly know," he admitted. "For 8 months, hunting the gang has been my whole life. I'm not sure who Nathan Cole is when he's not tracking killers and planning revenge." Clara moved closer to him, studying his profile in the growing light. The hard lines around his eyes had softened slightly, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked like a man who might be capable of peace. "Maybe," she said carefully. "He's a man who could build something instead of just tearing things down. A man who could create a life worth living instead of just surviving." Nathan turned to look at her, and Clara saw something in his expression that made her heart race. That would depend on whether he had someone worth building that life with. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and hope. Clara thought about the choice before her, the safe path that led to anonymity and security, or the uncertain road that might lead to something she'd never dared to imagine. "I've been thinking," she said slowly, "about what you said that first night, about how we both lost family to the same evil, and how that gives us something to build on. And—" Clara took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would shape the rest of her life. "I think maybe we've built something already. Maybe we've been building it all along, through the planning and the trust and the willingness to risk everything for each other." Nathan's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining as naturally as if they'd been doing it for years instead of days. "Clara, I need you to understand something. I can't promise you an easy life. There'll always be men who remember Nathan Cole, the bounty hunter, men who might want to settle old scores. And I'm not exactly husband material. I don't know the first thing about being the kind of man a woman like you deserves." Clara smiled, feeling a lightness in her chest that she hadn't experienced since before her father's death. "A woman like me? Nathan, a week ago I was a prisoner who'd lost everything and everyone she'd ever loved. You gave me back my freedom, my dignity, and the chance to fight for something bigger than myself. If that's not husband material, I don't know what is." The kiss, when it came, was gentle and tentative at first, then deeper as they both realized that this was real, that the partnership forged in desperation and danger had become something neither of them had expected to find. When they finally separated, both were breathing hard and grinning like children who just discovered a wonderful secret. "So," Nathan said, his voice slightly unsteady, "what do we do now? Where do we go?" Clara considered the question, thinking about all the places she dreamed of seeing during her father's mail runs. "California," she said finally. "I've always wanted to see the ocean. And they say there are opportunities there for people willing to work hard and start fresh." "California it is," Nathan agreed, "though I should warn you it's a long journey and we'll have to be careful. Some of Black Sam's men might have escaped the canyon, and they'll be looking for revenge." "Let them look," Clara said with a confidence that surprised them both. "We've faced the worst they could throw at us and come out stronger. Whatever comes next, we'll handle it together." They rode south as the sun climbed higher, leaving the smoking ruins of Bitter Creek Canyon far behind them. The destruction of the gang's stronghold would be talked about for years to come. How an unknown man and woman had infiltrated the supposedly impregnable hideout and brought down the most feared criminal organization in 3 territories. But Clara and Nathan weren't thinking about their growing legend as they rode toward their new life. They were thinking about the future, about the ranch they might build in California's Central Valley, about the children who might one day play in the yard while their parents watched from the porch, about the peaceful years that stretched ahead like an unwritten book waiting to be filled with their story. Behind them, a column of black smoke still rose from the canyon, visible for miles in the clear mountain air. It was a funeral pyre for the Bitter Creek Gang's reign of terror, and a beacon of hope for all the innocent people who would sleep safer because two unlikely partners had found the courage to fight back against impossible odds. As they crested a ridge that would hide the smoke from view, Clara turned for one last look at the scene of their triumph. Then she faced forward, toward the west and the future, her hand clasped firmly in Nathan's as their horses carried them down the red dust road toward whatever adventures awaited them. The sun was climbing toward its zenith when they finally disappeared into the vast landscape of the American frontier. Two souls who had found each other in darkness and chosen to walk together into the light. Behind them lay a past marked by tragedy and loss. Ahead lay the promise of redemption, the possibility of love, and the chance to write a new chapter in the ongoing story of the untamed West. The Bitter Creek Gang was finished, their power broken forever. But the story of Nathan Cole and Clara Monroe was just beginning, and it would be written in the hopeful language of second chances and new beginnings, in a land where anything was possible for those brave enough to seize their destiny and make it their own.